You know what the most terrifying sound in the universe is? It's not the roar of a dying star, not the screech of metal being torn apart by gravity wells, and certainly not the battle cry of a Zephyrian war beast. No, the most terrifying sound is the soft, almost polite clearing of a human throat right before they are about to completely destroy your entire civilization with words. I should know. I was there when Captain Marcus Webb did exactly that. My name is Torvin Kalir, and I'm what you might call a diplomatic observer for the Hegemony Council. Fancy title, really. What it actually means is that I sit in courtrooms across the galaxy, watching various species try to out-lawyer each other while pretending their arguments make sense. It's about as exciting as watching paint dry on a dead planet. But it pays well, and someone has to document the slow decline of galactic civilization. The day everything changed started like any other tedious session in the High Court of Arcturus Prime. The chamber was packed with representatives from 47 different species, all there to witness what everyone assumed would be humanity's final humiliation. The humans had been dragged before the court on charges of excessive military aggression and violation of established galactic protocol. Basically, they'd been winning too many wars, and the other species were getting nervous. The prosecutor was High Magistrate Velen Crix, a Thurian with scales that shimmered like oil and a voice that could cut through steel. He'd built his career on breaking down smaller species' legal defenses, and he was practically drooling at the chance to put humanity in their place. The Thurians had been the dominant military force in this sector for over 3 centuries, and they weren't about to let some upstart mammals challenge their authority. The evidence is overwhelming, Crix announced, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he addressed the packed gallery. The humans have violated no fewer than 17 peace treaties, engaged in unprovoked conflicts with 6 different species, and shown complete disregard for the established order that has kept this sector stable for generations. The gallery murmured in agreement. Representatives from the Valeri Trade Consortium nodded their scaled heads approvingly. The insectoid hive mind delegates clicked their mandibles in what passed for applause among their kind. Even the normally neutral ethereal collective seemed to lean forward in anticipation. Captain Webb sat alone at the defendant's table, looking remarkably calm for someone whose entire species was about to be declared a galactic menace. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40 standard years, with the kind of quiet confidence that either comes from supreme arrogance or knowing something nobody else does. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his posture relaxed, and he hadn't said a single word since the proceedings began. That should have been our first warning. Crix continued his presentation, pulling up holographic displays of human military actions across the sector. Look at this pattern of aggression. The humans attacked the Gorvani mining stations without provocation. I had to suppress a laugh at that one. The Gorvani had been using those mining stations to strip mine inhabited worlds, killing billions of indigenous life forms in the process. The humans had asked nicely for them to stop, twice. The third time, they'd asked with plasma cannon. They interfered with legitimate Kasari harvesting operations. The Kasari harvesting operations had been kidnapping sentient beings and selling them into slavery. The humans had a rather strong opinion about that sort of thing. They destroyed 3 separate Nexus Corporation facilities. The Nexus Corporation had been conducting illegal bioweapons research. The humans had offered to help them relocate their research to something less genocidal. The corporation had declined. Violent, but facts, as I have learned over my many years in diplomatic service, are remarkably flexible things when you are in a courtroom. Crix spun each incident as proof of human aggression, carefully omitting the context that might make the humans look sympathetic. The gallery ate it up, and most damning of all, Crix declared, his voice rising to a crescendo. They have consistently refused to submit to proper galactic authority. They ignore our trade regulations. They refuse to pay the required tribute to the Hegemony Council. And they have the audacity to claim that their primitive notion of individual rights supersedes the collective good of galactic civilization. The chamber erupted in agreement. Species that had been enemies for millennia suddenly found common ground in their shared outrage at human arrogance. It was beautiful, in a twisted sort of way. Nothing brings people together quite like finding someone they can all look down on. Judge Sovereign Malix, a towering Zenthari, whose crystalline body refracted light in hypnotic patterns, called for order. Captain Webb, he intoned, his voice resonating through the chamber like the sound of distant thunder. You have heard the charges against your species. How do you plead? This was it. This was the moment when Captain Webb would either grovel for mercy or launch into some desperate defense of human actions. The gallery leaned forward, eager to watch the final act of humanity's downfall. Webb stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. He looked around the chamber, his gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives, with what I could only describe as mild amusement. Then he smiled, not a nervous smile, not a defiant smile, a genuinely amused smile, like someone had just told him a particularly good joke. Your Honor, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite speaking barely above conversational volume. I have just one question. Judge Malix's crystalline features flickered with confusion. This is not the time for questions, Captain. You are here to enter a plea. Oh, I will get that, Webb replied, his smile widening. But first I'm curious about something. When exactly did this court gain jurisdiction over humanity? The chamber fell silent. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a storm. Crix's scales rippled with what I recognized as confusion mixed with irritation. Captain Webb, Crix said slowly, humanity is part of the galactic community. All species within the hegemony's sphere of influence are subject to this court's jurisdiction. Are they? Webb asked, and there was something in his tone that made my diplomatic instincts scream warnings. That's interesting, because I have been reviewing the relevant documents, and I can't seem to find humanity's signature on any treaty that would establish such jurisdiction. The silence grew deeper. Judge Malix's crystalline form began to pulse with a faint, nervous light. Captain, your species has been operating within our space for over 50 standard years. Participation in galactic trade and diplomacy constitutes implicit acceptance of our authority. Implicit acceptance, Webb repeated, nodding thoughtfully. That's a fascinating legal theory. I wonder if it applies to everyone here. He turned to face the gallery, and I swear I could feel the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Tell me, High Magistrate Crix, Webb continued, his voice still pleasant and conversational. When did the Thurian Empire officially join the Hegemony Council? Crix's scales rippled again, this time with what I was beginning to recognize as panic. The Thurian Empire has been a founding member of the Council for over 4 centuries. Has it? Webb pulled out a small data pad and consulted it with the air of someone checking a grocery list. According to the historical records I have reviewed, the Thurian Empire conquered the original Hegemony Council member worlds and simply took over their seats. No treaties signed, no formal agreements. Just good old-fashioned conquest. The gallery was beginning to murmur now, a low buzz of confusion and growing concern. Webb seemed to be enjoying himself immensely. And the Velari Trade Consortium, he continued, turning to face their delegation. How exactly did they gain their seat on the council? The lead Velari delegate, a serpentine creature named Seth Moore, hissed softly. The consortium has represented trade interests in this sector for generations. By are represented, you mean monopolized through systematic destruction of competitors? Webb replied cheerfully. The consortium wiped out 47 different trading companies and absorbed their assets. No legal proceedings, no compensation to the displaced workers, just economic warfare on a massive scale. He was systematically working his way through the gallery now, and I could see the growing panic in the assembled representatives. Each species' dark secrets were being dragged into the light with surgical precision. The Kasari Collective gained their influence through systematic slave trading. The Nexus Corporation bought their way into the council through bribery and blackmail. The Gorvani conquered their way to power through 3 separate campaigns of genocide. And the Ethereal Collective. He paused to address the floating, translucent beings in the far corner. Well, let's just say that their peaceful transcendence involved the forced absorption of 17 different species' consciousness. The chamber was in chaos now. Representatives were shouting denials, accusations, and counter-accusations. Some were already edging toward the exits. Judge Malix was pulsing with increasingly frantic light patterns, trying to restore order. Webb stood in the center of it all, perfectly calm, waiting for the noise to die down. When it finally did, he spoke again, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You see, the fascinating thing about this court is that it's based on a lie. The Hegemony Council isn't a legitimate government. It's a protection racket run by the biggest bullies in the galaxy. You have been so busy telling everyone else how to behave that you have forgotten to examine your own legal foundation." He turned back to Judge Malix, who was now pulsing with what I could only describe as existential dread. "So I will ask again, Your Honor, when exactly did this court gain jurisdiction over humanity? Because according to every legal document I can find, this entire proceeding is nothing more than an elaborate kidnapping." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the tension in the chamber like a physical presence. Every representative in the gallery was staring at Webb, with expressions ranging from shock to terror to barely contained rage. Judge Malix's crystalline form had gone completely dark. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Captain Webb, are you suggesting that this court has no legal authority?" Webb's smile was the smile of someone who had just played the perfect hand in a game where everyone else thought they were cheating. "Your Honor, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact. This court, this council, this entire power structure you have built, it's all illegal. Every single one of you gained your positions through violence, conquest, or corruption. You have no more legal authority over humanity than a street gang has over a sovereign nation." He paused, letting that sink in. "And that brings me to my plea," he continued, his voice still maddeningly calm. "Not guilty. Not just to these ridiculous charges, but to the entire premise of this proceeding. Humanity rejects the jurisdiction of this court, the authority of this council, and the legitimacy of this entire charade." The chamber of species that had been allies for centuries were suddenly screaming at each other. Ancient grudges were being aired, old crimes dragged into the light. The careful balance of power that had kept the sector stable for generations was crumbling in real time. Judge Malix was pulsing so rapidly now that I was worried he might shatter. "Captain Webb, you cannot simply reject the court's authority." "Can't I?" Webb asked, and for the first time, there was steel in his voice. "Because here's the thing, Your Honor. Humanity has been keeping detailed records of everything that happens in this sector. Every crime, every cover-up, every dirty deal. We know where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a data chip, holding it up for everyone to see. "This contains complete documentation of every illegal act committed by every species represented in this chamber. War crimes, genocide, slavery, corruption, illegal weapons development, you name it. 300 years of carefully documented evidence." The chamber had gone completely silent again. Even the representatives who had been shouting were now staring at the tiny chip with expressions of absolute horror. "Now, here's what's going to happen," Webb continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something to a particularly slow child. "Humanity is going to leave this court. We are going to go back to our space. And we are going to continue doing what we have always done. Living our lives trading with whoever wants to trade with us, and defending ourselves when attacked." He tucked the chip back into his jacket. "And if anyone has a problem with that, if anyone decides that humanity needs to be brought to heel or taught a lesson, well, then this little chip finds its way to every news network, every independent government, and every resistance movement in the galaxy. I wonder how long your various empires would last if everyone knew the truth about how you really gained power." The silence stretched on. I could practically hear the mental calculations going on in the minds of the assembled representatives. The cost-benefit analysis of trying to maintain their authority versus the risk of having their crimes exposed to the galaxy. Webb looked around the chamber one more time, his expression returning to that mild amusement from earlier. "Oh, and one more thing," he said casually. "For those of you thinking about trying to stop humanity from leaving, or perhaps arranging some kind of accident for me personally, I should mention that this information has already been distributed to several independent parties. Something happens to me, or to any human ship leaving this system, and the entire galaxy gets a very detailed history lesson." He straightened his uniform jacket and headed for the exit, pausing only to address Judge Malix one final time. "Your Honor, this court is dismissed. Permanently." And with that, Captain Marcus Webb walked out of the High Court of Arcturus Prime, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of a galactic empire that had ruled through fear and intimidation for over 3 centuries. The really impressive part: it had taken him less than 20 minutes. I sat in my observer's seat, watching the chaos unfold around me, and I couldn't help but laugh. In all my years of diplomatic service, I had never seen anything quite like it. A single human had walked into a courtroom packed with the most powerful beings in the galaxy and systematically dismantled their entire power structure with nothing but words and the truth. The representatives were fleeing now, each species racing to get back to their home worlds before the implications of what had just happened could fully sink in. The Hegemony Council was dissolving in real time, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. As I gathered my notes and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but wonder what came next. The old order was dead, that much was certain, but what would rise to replace it? Looking back, I should have realized that the humans probably had a plan for that too. After all, you don't dismantle a galactic empire with a single sentence unless you have thought very carefully about what happens next. But that's a story for another day. 3 days. That's all it took for the entire Galactic Order to collapse after Captain Webb walked out of that courtroom. 3 days for 4 centuries of carefully maintained power structures to crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. I should have gone home to my quiet little moon base and filed my report like a sensible diplomatic observer. Instead, I found myself following the aftermath like a rubbernecker at a stellar collision. Call it professional curiosity, call it morbid fascination, but I had to see how this played out. The first domino fell within hours. The Valari Trade Consortium emergency board meeting lasted exactly 70 minutes before dissolving into accusations, counter-accusations, and what I can only describe as a full-scale corporate civil war. Turns out, when everyone knows you are criminals, maintaining unity becomes remarkably difficult. The Kasari Collective fared even worse. Their slave trading network, once hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and legal fiction, was suddenly exposed to the galaxy. Within 2 days, 17 different species were filing formal complaints with the Galactic Commerce Authority. The Kasari went from galactic power brokers to pariahs faster than you could say economic sanctions. But here's the thing that really got my attention. The humans weren't gloating, they weren't sending out victory messages or holding press conferences, they were just waiting. Like they knew something the rest of us didn't. That should have been our second warning. I decided to do something incredibly stupid and investigate. Using my diplomatic credentials, I managed to book passage on a neutral transport heading toward human space. The journey gave me plenty of time to think about what I'd witnessed, and the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. How had Captain Webb known so much about every species' dirty secrets? How had the humans gathered such detailed intelligence? And most importantly, what were they planning to do with their newfound position as the galaxy's most feared species? The transport dropped me off at Haven Station, a human-run trading post on the edge of their territorial space. The station was bustling with activity, but it was unlike anything I'd seen in the core world. Species that had been at each other's throats for generations were working together, trading freely, even socializing. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost festive. It was completely unnatural. I made my way to the station's main bar, an establishment called The Honest Broker, that seemed to cater to a remarkably diverse clientele. The bartender was a human woman named Lisa Park, who served drinks with the kind of easy confidence that suggested she'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer, and wasn't particularly impressed by any of it. "You are the diplomatic observer from the Arctira's trial," she said, sliding a drink across the bar before I'd even ordered. "Torvin Khalil, right? I heard you were asking questions about our boy Marcus." I accepted the drink cautiously. It was some kind of human alcohol that tasted like liquid fire and regret. "How did you know who I was?" "Word travels fast out here," she replied with a shrug. "Plus, we have been expecting you, or someone like you anyway. People always want to know what comes next." "And what does come next?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smiled, and it was the same kind of smile Captain Webb had worn in that courtroom. The smile of someone who knew exactly what game they were playing. "That depends on what you mean by next," she said. "If you are asking whether we are planning to conquer the galaxy and establish a human empire, the answer is no. That's not really our style." "Then what is your style?" Before she could answer, the bar's main screen flickered to life, displaying a news broadcast from the core worlds. The anchor, a nervous-looking Therian, was reporting on the latest developments in what the media was calling the Great Collapse. Riots continue on 7 different worlds as the Nexus Corporation's bioweapon research facilities are stormed by angry protesters. Meanwhile, the Govani Mining Consortium has declared bankruptcy after mass boycotts of their products. And in what may be the most significant development yet, the Ethereal Collective has announced the voluntary release of all absorbed consciousness, effectively dissolving their entire civilization. Lisa muted the broadcast and turned back to me. "That's what comes next. Not human conquest, but everyone else finally dealing with the consequences of their actions." "The humans orchestrated this," I said. "It wasn't a question. Orchestrated is a strong word," she replied. "We just provided information. What people do with that information is their choice." A new voice joined the conversation. "Though we may have provided a little guidance along the way, I in to see Captain Webb himself approaching the bar. He looked exactly as calm and collected as he had in the courtroom, though he'd traded his formal uniform for civilian clothes." "Captain Webb," I said, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Please, call me Marcus," he said, taking a seat beside me. "And I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk. Lisa, could you give us some privacy?" She nodded and moved to the other end of the bar, leaving us alone. Webb ordered something called a whiskey neat, and studied me with those calculating eyes. "You are wondering how we knew," he said finally. "How we had all that information, how we knew exactly which buttons to push to bring down the council." The thought had occurred to me, I admitted. "It's actually a fascinating story," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "It all started about 50 years ago, when humanity first made contact with galactic civilization. We were excited, naturally. First contact with alien species, the chance to join a larger community, all that romantic nonsense." His expression darkened slightly, but it didn't take long for us to realize that this galactic community was nothing more than a protection racket. Pay tribute, follow orders, don't ask questions. The typical imperial setup, just with better marketing. "So you started gathering intelligence," I said. "We started surviving," he corrected. "See, humans have this unfortunate tendency to ask uncomfortable questions, like why the Kasari needed so many agricultural workers from pre-industrial world, or why the Nexus Corporation's medical research facilities were always located on planets with large indigenous populations." He paused, staring into his drink. "The more we learned, the more we realized that the entire Galactic Order was built on a foundation of crime and corruption. Every major power had gotten there through violence, exploitation, or both. The Hegemony Council wasn't keeping the peace. It was enforcing a system of organized crime. But why wait 50 years to act?" I asked. "Why not expose everything immediately?" Webb's smile returned, and it was genuinely amused this time. "Because we are not idiots. You don't take down a galactic empire with a press release. You need leverage, you need timing, and most importantly, you need an alternative. An alternative." "Look around you," he said, gesturing toward the bar's diverse clientele. This station processes more trade than any 3 council-controlled ports. We have diplomatic relations with over 200 independent species. We have mediated 17 different territorial disputes, prevented 4 wars, and established trade agreements that benefit everyone involved. I looked around the bar with new eyes. The casual cooperation I'd noticed earlier suddenly made sense. These weren't just random aliens sharing drinks. They were representatives of a new kind of galactic community, one built on mutual benefit rather than enforced submission. You built a shadow government, I said, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. We built something better, Webb replies. A duly association of free species. No tribute, no forced membership, no imperial hierarchy. Just trade, cooperation, and mutual defense. And if someone threatens this association, his expression hardened. Then they find out why humans are so good at war. As if summoned by his words, the bar's main screen flickered back to life. This time, it was showing a live feed from the Thurian home system. The once mighty Thurian fleet, pride of the galactic military, was facing off against a small human task force. The Thurians aren't taking the collapse well, Webb observed casually. They have decided that if they can't rule the galaxy through the Council, they will do it through direct military conquest. They are demanding that all former Council members submit to direct Thurian rule. On the screen, I could see the size difference between the 2 fleets. The Thurians had over 300 capital ships, including their massive dreadnoughts. The human force consisted of maybe 30 vessels, most of which looked like modified civilian craft. That's not even a fair fight, I said, horrified at the impending massacre. No, Webb agreed. It's not. The lead Thurian ship, a massive battlecruiser called the Eternal Dominion, was broadcasting demands for immediate surrender. The human response was being transmitted on all frequencies, and I recognized the voice immediately. It was Captain Webb. But that was impossible. Webb was sitting right next to me, calmly sipping his whiskey. Pre-recorded message, he explained, noticing my confusion. I sent it 3 days ago, right after the trial. Amazing what you can accomplish when you plan ahead. On the screen, the recorded Webb was delivering humanity's response to the Thurian ultimatum. His words were simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying in their quiet confidence. To the Thurian Empire, and any other species considering military action against the Free Association of Worlds, we have spent 50 years watching you terrorize smaller species. We have documented your crimes, your atrocities, and your systematic oppression of anyone too weak to fight back. We have been patient. We have been diplomatic. We have given you every chance to change. The Thurian fleet was moving into attack formation, their massive ships preparing to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority. That time is over. Webb's recorded voice continued. Humanity and our allies will no longer tolerate your reign of terror. This is your final warning. Withdraw your forces, release all enslaved populations, and submit to war crimes tribunals. You have 1 hour to comply. The Thurian commander's response was predictable: laughter, threats, and a countdown to the attack. The human fleet made no move to retreat, despite being outnumbered 10-1. Marcus, I said, turning to the real Webb, your people are about to be slaughtered. Are they? He asked mildly. The Thurian fleet opened fire, their massive energy weapons lancing out toward the human ships. The space around the human fleet lit up like a miniature star as hundreds of plasma bolts converged on their position. And then something impossible happened. The human ships didn't die. They didn't even seem particularly bothered. The plasma bolts that should have vaporized them were being absorbed by some kind of energy field, the deadly weapons fire dissipating harmlessly around their hulls. What the hell? I breathed. Adaptive shielding, Webb explained conversationally. We have been working on it for about 40 years. Amazing what you can accomplish when you are not spending all your time oppressing other species. The Thurian fleet fired again, this time with everything they had. The result was the same. The human ships absorbed the incoming fire like it was nothing more than a light rain. Then the humans returned fire. I had seen human weapons before during their various conflicts with Council forces. They were effective, but nothing spectacular. Solid kinetic projectiles, basic energy weapons, the kind of technology you'd expect from a relatively new spacefaring species. What I saw on that screen was something else entirely. The human ships fired what looked like small, innocuous projectiles. They moved slowly, almost lazily, toward the Thurian fleet. The Thurians barely bothered to defend against them, assuming they were dealing with primitive kinetic weapons. The first projectile struck the Eternal Dominion's shields and simply passed through. No explosion, no dramatic energy discharge. It just slipped through the shields like they weren't even there. Then it hit the ship's hull. The entire dreadnought, a vessel over 3 kilometers long, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not exploded, not vaporized. It was there one moment, gone the next, as if it had never been built. Temporal displacement weapons, Webb said, his voice still maddeningly calm. We remove the target from the timeline, surgically, precisely, with no collateral damage. The crew is relocated to a pleasant little planet, where they can contemplate their life choices. The ship itself is deleted from history. The Thurian fleet was in chaos. Their flagship had just vanished, and they had no idea what had happened or how to defend against it. Ship after ship disappeared as the human projectiles found their targets, each one erased from existence with clinical efficiency. Within minutes, the mighty Thurian fleet was reduced to a handful of ships fleeing in all directions. The human task force hadn't lost a single vessel. That, Webb said, finishing his drink, is what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been gathering intelligence for 50 years. They'd been developing weapons technology that made the rest of the galaxy's military might look like stone knives and bearskins. How many species know about this? I asked. Just you and whatever's left of the Thurian High Command, Webb replied, though I suspect word will spread quickly. Nothing travels faster than news of a military upset. As if to prove his point, the bar's communication system chimed with incoming messages. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. The Gorvani had announced their immediate withdrawal from all disputed territory. The Kasari were releasing their slaves and offering reparations to victim species. The Nexus Corporation was shutting down all weapons research and opening their facilities to independent inspection. They are all surrendering, I said, watching the reports scroll by. They are all learning, Webb corrected. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's bullies are discovering that actions have consequences. And what happens now? I asked. Do the humans become the new galactic empire? Webb stood up, leaving payment for his drink on the bar. That's the beauty of it, Torvin. There is no empire. There's just a choice. Species can join the free association, work together for mutual benefit, and enjoy the protection of our technology. Or they can go their own way, as long as they don't threaten others. And if they choose neither, if they decide to continue the old ways, his smile was sharp as a blade, then they get to find out what 50 years of human military development looks like. He started to leave, then paused. By the way, your government has been invited to join the association. The invitation is open-ended, but I'd suggest not waiting too long. The galaxy is changing, and it's better to be on the right side of history. As he walked away, I sat at the bar, trying to process everything I'd witnessed. The humans had just reshaped galactic civilization with a combination of intelligence, patience, and overwhelming technological superiority. They dismantled a 4-century-old empire without firing a shot in anger, then demonstrated that resistance was futile by casually erasing an entire fleet from existence. It was the most brilliant military and political campaign in galactic history. The bartender, Lisa, returned and began cleaning glasses. So, she said, conversationally, what do you think? I think, I said slowly, that the galaxy just got a lot more interesting. She laughed. Oh, you have no idea. This is just the beginning. As I sat there, watching the reports of surrenders and treaty requests flood in from across the galaxy, I couldn't help but marvel at the elegant simplicity of it all. The humans had spent 50 years being underestimated, dismissed as primitive newcomers by species that had ruled for centuries. They'd used that time build something unprecedented, a truly free association of worlds based on mutual benefit rather than fear. And when the old powers finally realized the threat, it was already too late. Captain Marcus Webb had walked into that courtroom with a simple goal to expose the truth about galactic civilization. But he'd accomplished something far more significant. He'd ended an age of imperial tyranny and ushered in something new. The age of human leadership had begun, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple revolutionary idea that all species deserved to be free. And the most terrifying part, they'd made it look easy. I finished my drink and headed back to my transport, my mind already working on the report I would have to file. How do you explain to a galaxy that everything they thought they knew about power, politics, and military might had just been proven wrong by a species that most people still considered primitive? The answer, I realized, was simple. You don't explain it. You just document it and hope that history remembers you were there when everything changed. The human age had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. But somehow, looking around at the peaceful cooperation in that little bar, I thought that might not be such a bad thing after all. I was about to leave when Lisa called out to me, "Torvin, there's someone else who wants to meet you." She gestured toward a corner booth, where a figure sat shrouded in shadows. As I approached, I recognized the distinctive bioluminescent patterns of a Zenthari, the same species as Judge Malik's. But this one was different. Where the judge's crystalline form had pulsed with nervous energy, this being radiated calm authority. "Ambassador Kaye," the figure said, rising gracefully. "I am Kalen Voss, former security chief of the Hegemony Council. I have been hoping to speak with you." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man responsible for enforcing the Council's will was now seeking me out in a human establishment. "Former security chief?" I asked. "As of this morning," Voss confirmed. "The Council officially dissolved 3 hours ago. The remaining members voted to transfer all authority to individual species governments and recommended that all member worlds consider joining the Free Association." He paused, his crystalline features shifting to display what I had learned was amusement. Among his people, the vote was unanimous. Even the Thurians voted to dissolve, though they did so from the medical bay where they are being treated for shock. "And you came here because?" "Because I spent 40 years watching the Council commit atrocities in the name of galactic stability," Voss replied. "I told myself it was necessary, that the alternative was chaos. But when Captain Webb exposed the truth in that courtroom, I finally understood what we had really built." He gestured for me to sit, and I found myself curious enough to accept. The humans offered me a position in their new order, Deputy Director of Interspecies Justice. My job would be to help prosecute the war criminals and ensure that the transition to the new system is peaceful. "And you accepted?" "I haven't decided yet," he admitted. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. You were there. You saw everything. What's your assessment of human intentions?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with myself. They seem genuine about wanting a truly free association of worlds, but they have also demonstrated that they have the power to enforce their will if necessary. "It's exactly my concern," Voss said. "What happens when the humans decide that freedom requires certain adjustments? What happens when they start making decisions for other species for their own good?" Before I could answer, Captain Webb appeared at our table. His timing was either remarkable or he'd been listening to our conversation. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already pulling up a chair. I couldn't help but overhear the question, and I think it deserves an answer. Voss stiffened slightly, but nodded. "Please, Captain. I'm curious about your perspective." Webb settled into his chair with that same casual confidence I'd seen in the courtroom. "The question you are really asking is whether humanity will become the new oppressor. Whether we will start with good intentions and end up just like the Council. Will you?" Voss asked directly. "Probably," Webb replied, and the casual honesty of it was startling. Eventually, that's what power does to people, isn't it? It corrupts, it changes you, it makes you think you know what's best for everyone else. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Voss spoke. Then why should anyone trust you? Webb's smile was rueful. Because we know it's going to happen. That's the difference between us and the council. They believed they were the good guys right up until the end. We know we are going to screw this up eventually. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. That's why we have built safeguards into the system. Term limits. For all leadership positions. Mandatory rotation of authority between species. Independent oversight committees. And most importantly, a constitutional requirement that any species can leave the association at any time, for any reason, with no penalties. And if they try to leave and you decide they are too valuable to lose, I asked, then they leave anyway, Webb said simply. That's the whole point. The moment we start forcing people to stay, we become everything we fought against. Voss leaned back, his crystalline form flickering with what I recognized as deep thought. You are asking us to trust in human restraint, to believe that you will willingly give up power when the time comes. No, Webb corrected. I'm asking you to trust in human paranoia. We have spent 50 years watching what happens when good intentions go bad. We have seen how every empire in the galaxy started with noble goals and ended up as a collection of tyrants. He paused, then continued. The association isn't designed to prevent corruption. It's designed to survive it. When humanity inevitably becomes the problem, the system will remove us from power and put someone else in charge. And you are comfortable with that? Voss asked. Webb's laugh was genuinely amused. Comfortable? Hell no. But it's necessary. The galaxy doesn't need another human empire. It needs a system that works regardless of who's running it. A new voice interrupted our conversation. If I may add something to this fascinating discussion. We turned to see another alien approaching our table. This one was a Solari, a species I'd encountered only rarely in my diplomatic career. They were known for their advanced computational abilities and their tendency to think in terms of millennia rather than years. Elder Thys, Webb said, rising respectfully. I wasn't expecting to see you here. The Solari Collective has been monitoring the situation, Thys replied, settling into the remaining chair with fluid grace. We have run approximately 87,000 simulations of potential outcomes based on the current galactic restructuring. And, I prompted, the results are intriguing, Thys said. In 73.2% of our simulations, the free association leads to unprecedented galactic peace and prosperity. In 18.7% of cases, it evolves into a benevolent but authoritarian human hegemony. In 7.8% of cases, it collapses within 50 years, leading to widespread conflict, and the remaining 0.3%. Voss asked. Thys's expression was unreadable. In those simulations, something unprecedented occurred. The galaxy achieves what we call stable cooperation, a state where multiple species work together without any central authority, where conflicts are resolved through negotiation rather than force, and where technological advancement benefits everyone. That sounds like paradise, I said. It is. Thys agreed. It's also theoretically impossible according to every model we have developed over the past millennium. Yet the current situation contains variables we have never encountered before. Webb leaned forward. What variables? Human unpredictability, Thys replied. Every other species in the galaxy follows patterns that can be predicted with reasonable accuracy. The Thurians always choose military solutions. The Kasari always choose profit. The Ethereals always choose absorption. But humans? You do things that make no mathematical sense. Such as developing weapons that could conquer the galaxy and then choosing not to use them for conquest, Thys said. Such as exposing corruption even when it benefits you. Such as building systems designed to remove your own species from power. The Solari paused, their complex features shifting in what I had learned was their equivalent of a smile. Our simulations cannot account for a species that acts against its own apparent interests in service of abstract principles. It creates what we call positive chaos, unpredictable outcomes that tend toward beneficial results. So you are saying humans are too crazy to predict, I asked. I'm saying humans are the first species we have encountered that seems to have learned from history rather than being doomed to repeat it. This replied. Whether that learning will continue remains to be seen. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the bar. The main screen was showing breaking news from across the galaxy. The Nexus Corporation had just announced that they were releasing all their advanced medical technology to the public domain. The Gorvani had declared their intention to restore all the worlds they had strip-mined. The Kasari were offering full reparations to every species they had enslaved. It's working, Voss said, staring at the screen. The fear of human retaliation is making everyone confess their crimes and try to make amends. Fear is a powerful motivator, Webb agreed. But it's not sustainable. That's why we are offering membership in the association. Carrot and stick, as we say. And if fear stops working, I asked. Webb's expression hardened. Then we remind people why they were afraid in the first place. But we do it surgically, precisely, with minimal collateral damage. The goal is justice, not revenge. As if summoned by his words, the screen switched to a new feed. This one showed human ships arriving at various worlds throughout the galaxy. But these weren't military vessels, they were hospital ships, engineering vessels, and what appeared to be massive cargo haulers. The aid convoys, Webb explained. We are sending medical supplies, food and technical assistance to every world that's been damaged by council policies. Former slaves get healthcare and education. Strip-mined worlds get restoration technology. War-torn systems get peacekeeping forces. For free, Voss asked. For free, Webb confirmed. The association takes care of its own. And right now, that includes everyone who's been victimized by the old system. The scope of the operation was staggering. Hundreds of ships, thousands of personnel, aid for billions of beings across the galaxy. It was the largest humanitarian effort in galactic history. The cost must be enormous, I said. It is, Webb agreed, but it's also an investment. Help people rebuild their lives, and they remember who helped them, show them that cooperation works better than exploitation, and they become partners instead of subjects. This spoke up again. Our calculations suggest that this aid program will cost humanity approximately 23% of their annual economic output for the next decade. That's unsustainable, Voss protested. In the short term, yes, This agreed, but it will also create trading partners, allies, and a web of mutual obligation that will generate far more wealth than the initial investment. The humans are playing a very long game. Webb finished his drink and stood. That's the thing about freedom. It's not free. Someone has to pay for it. We are just making sure that payment comes from those who can afford it, rather than those who can't. As he prepared to leave, he turned back to Voss. I hope you will accept our offer. The galaxy needs people who understand the old system well enough to help us avoid repeating its mistakes. After Webb left, the three of us sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Voss spoke. I have made my decision. I'm going to accept their offer. Why? I asked. Because despite everything, I believe them, Voss replied. Not because I think they are perfect, but because they are the first species I have encountered that seems to understand that power is temporary, and that systems matter more than individuals. This nodded in agreement. The Solari Collective has reached a similar conclusion. We will be joining the Free Association within the month. And you, Ambassador Kiel? Voss asked. What will you do? I thought about it, considering my options. I could return to my quiet moonbase and file reports that no one would read, or I could be part of something unprecedented in galactic history. I think, I said slowly, that I'm going to request a transfer to the Association's diplomatic corps. This story isn't over yet, and I want to see how it ends. As I finally left the bar that night, I realized that I had witnessed something remarkable. Not just the fall of an empire or the rise of a new power, but the birth of something entirely new. A civilization built on the radical idea that different species could work together as equals. Whether it would last remained to be seen. But for the first time in my diplomatic career, I was genuinely optimistic about the future. The human age had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. But somehow, looking around at the peaceful cooperation in that little bar, I thought that might not be such a bad thing, after all. In fact, it might be the best thing that had ever happened to us.